Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're all about cutting through all that noise and getting straight to the heart of what you need to know. And today, we're going to be tackling something that might seem a little dry at first glance, but trust me, it's absolutely essential for any orthopedic resident who is getting ready for those big postgraduate exams, like the FRCS. We're talking about tribology.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Tribology often gets overlooked, but it's the foundation of how our joints work, both natural and artificial. And,
Right.
understanding these concepts can really make a huge difference when you're out there diagnosing problems, selecting the right implants, and, of course, ensuring the best possible outcomes for your patients.
Couldn't agree more. So let's start with the fundamentals. What exactly are we talking about when we say friction, and why is it so important when we're thinking about the mechanics of joints?
Well, you can think of it this way. Every time you move, you've got surfaces inside your joints that are rubbing against each other, right? And friction is that force that's resisting that motion.
Okay, makes sense.
And if you zoom in at a microscopic level, those surfaces aren't perfectly smooth. They've got these tiny little bumps and valleys. We call them asperities.
Asperities.
Yeah, and the rougher those surfaces are, the more those asperities kind of interlock, and that's what creates friction.
Okay, that makes sense. I can picture that.
Yeah.
But how do we actually go about measuring that roughness? I know the notes mention something called RAW.
Raw.
Right.
Is that again?
RAW stands for mean surface roughness.
Yeah.
It basically gives us like an average height of those asperities. So the lower the raw value, the smoother the surface is going to be.
Gotcha. So lower is smoother.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, to give you some context, think about articular cartilage. That smooth, slippery surface in our joints that has a raw value of about 1 to 6.
Okay.
Now, compare that to a polished implant stem. Super smooth comes in at like 0.01 to 0.03.
Wow.
It's like comparing sandpaper to a mirror.
Yeah, really puts it into perspective.
But here's the interesting thing. A matte implant stem has a much higher raw value, somewhere around 0.7 to 1.3.
So this really highlights how, surface finish can vary so much, even within implants.
Yeah, wow, that is a big difference. And makes you wonder how much those tiny imperfections actually affect the wear and tear on implants down the line.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of wear, let's move on to that next. It's kind of inevitable, right? Any material is going to wear down eventually, but understanding the different ways that wear happens is crucial for orthopedic surgeons.
Absolutely. Now, the notes talk about something called the McKellop modes of wear. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. McKellop basically categorized wear into 4 main modes. So mode 1 is what we usually think of as just normal wear and tear between two surfaces, like the cartilage in a healthy joint.
Okay, so just normal wear.
Exactly. Then there's mode 2, we call it stripe wear. And that happens between a primary and a secondary bearing surface. So think about an implant rubbing against the bone.
Okay, so 2 different types of surfaces rubbing together.
Yep. And we've got mode 3. This one's caused by foreign bodies, little things like bone cement particles or wear debris from the joint itself.
So those little bits that break off.
Precisely. And finally, mode 4. This one describes wear that happens between surfaces that aren't actually bearing any load. So like what we see with backside wear in an implant.
Interesting. Okay, so those are the different scenarios where wear can happen, but how does it actually occur? What are the mechanisms behind it?
Good question. So there are 3 main ways wear happens: abrasive, adhesive, and fatigue.
Okay, let's hear.
Abrasive wear is kind of like using sandpaper. You've got a harder material scratching away at a softer material,
Okay.
like those bone cement particles we talked about grinding away at cartilage.
Ouch.
Right. Then you've got adhesive wear. This happens when 2 surfaces stick together and then tear apart. You get material transfer from one surface to the other.
Oh, so they're basically swapping bits.
Exactly. And lastly, fatigue wear, sometimes called delamination. This one's a bit sneakier. It's caused by those repeated stress cycles over time that eventually exceed what the material can handle.
Okay, so it's not just things rubbing together. It's also about how much they can take before they break down.
Exactly. You get microscopic cracks forming, and eventually, boom, the material fails.
Wow, so there are all these different ways things can wear down depending on what they're made of and the forces at play.
Precisely.
So how do we actually measure this wear, especially when we're talking about patients with implants? The notes mention this thing called radiostereometric analysis, or RSA.
Yes, RSA. It's a really cool technique that allows us to measure wear very precisely.
Tell me more.
So we're talking both linear and volumetric terms. Linear wear is measured in millimeters per year, while volumetric wear is measured in, you guessed it, cubic millimeters per year.
Cubic millimeters per year.
Yeah, and it basically works by using 2 X-ray beams from different angles to pinpoint the exact location of an object in space.
Okay, so we can track exactly where it is.
Exactly. In the past, we used to have to implant little markers into the bone or the implant itself to track its position. But now we've got this awesome thing called markerless RSA, which uses the implant's own landmarks to track its movement over time.
So no more extra markers. That's
Ah,
pretty amazing.
it is. It's a really powerful tool for research and for keeping an eye on how our patients are doing.
Speaking of implants,
Hmm.
there's a really interesting image in the notes. It shows a broken implant and cement mantle. What could have caused this kind of failure?
Looking at that image, what really stands out to me is that there's no sign of bony union. So that tells us the implant's been through a lot of stress cycles, probably way more than it could handle.
So it just couldn't keep up.
Right, so the most likely culprit here is fatigue failure or delamination.
Makes sense. Can you walk us through how fatigue failure actually works? The notes mention this SN curve. What is that?
So the SN curve is basically a graph that shows how a material behaves under stress.
Okay.
The vertical axis represents the stress level, and the horizontal axis is the number of cycles. The curve shows us that as the stress goes down, the material can withstand more cycles before failing.
So lower stress equals longer life.
Exactly. And then you have the endurance limit or the fatigue limit. That's the stress level where theoretically the material could last forever.
Oh, wow. So there's a point where it just keeps going.
In theory, at least. But in this case, the implant experienced stresses that were below its breaking point but above its endurance limit. So over time, it just wore out.
So strong enough, but not forever strong enough.
That's it. And the notes also mention stress risers, which are basically weak points in a structure where stress concentrates.
It's like a weak link in a chain.
Exactly. Think of it like a hole in a piece of paper. It's much easier to tear the paper starting at the hole, right?
Right, because all the force is going there.
Exactly. In implants, features like screw holes or sharp corners can act as those stress risers, increasing the risk of things breaking down at those points.
Wow. So even those tiny design details can have a huge impact on how long an implant lasts.
You got it.
Now, how do surgeons balance that need for stability with the risk of creating these stress risers, especially when they're choosing things like the size of a screw?
That's a great question. It's a constant balancing act for us. A larger screw gives you more stability, but also creates a bigger stress riser. So it's about finding that sweet spot, getting enough fixation, but minimizing that risk of fatigue failure.
So it's a bit of an art as well as a science.
It really is. We have to consider the patient's bone quality, how active they are, and the specific design of the implant to make the best choice for each individual case.
This is all incredibly important stuff for any aspiring orthopedic surgeon to know. But I think it's time for us to take a quick pause and process all this information we've been throwing around. Just a reminder for everyone listening, we're diving deep into tribology today with the help of the Ortho Made Simple notes. You can find them on mokyingren.sg. They've been a fantastic guide for us so far.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to, let all that information sink in. Now, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about another really important aspect of tribology. Lubrication might seem pretty straightforward, but it's absolutely crucial for healthy joint function, both natural and artificial.
Oh, for sure. We touched on how surface roughness impacts friction earlier, but the notes bring up this concept of the lambda ratio.
Right, the lambda ratio.
So what is that exactly, and why is it so important when we're talking about lubrication?
Well, the lambda ratio is basically a way to figure out how well lubricated two surfaces are. It compares the thickness of that fluid film to the roughness of the surfaces.
Okay, so it's like a ratio of how much fluid is there compared to how bumpy the surfaces are.
Think of it like driving a car on a wet road.
Okay, I'm with you.
If there's enough water, you hydroplane, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's like fluid film lubrication. The surfaces are completely separated by that layer of fluid.
So they're not actually touching.
Nope. But if the water's too thin, your tires grip the road, that's more like boundary lubrication. The surfaces are touching even though there's still some fluid there.
So a higher lambda ratio means better lubrication, right?
Well, you'd think so, right? More fluid must be better, but there's a catch. When that fluid film gets too thick, you get something called fluid drag.
Fluid drag.
Yeah, it's like trying to walk through thick mud. The fluid itself starts to resist movement.
Oh, so it's like too much of a good thing.
Exactly. There's a sweet spot. You need enough fluid to keep those surfaces apart, but not so much that it hinders movement.
Makes sense. Now, the notes get into all these different types of lubrication, starting with fluid film lubrication. And there are like 6 subtypes: hydrodynamic, elastohydrodynamic, microelastohydrodynamic, squeeze film boosted, and weeping.
It's a mouthful.
I know.
It's a lot to take in.
Let's break it down using some real-world examples. So hydrodynamic lubrication. That's when the surfaces are moving quickly past each other. like when you're swinging your leg while you walk.
Okay, so during the swing phase.
Exactly. The fluid gets pulled into that space between the surfaces, creating a lifting pressure that keeps them apart.
So it's like the movement itself is creating the lubrication.
Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
Then you've got elasto-hydrodynamic lubrication. Yeah. This one takes into account the fact that the surfaces themselves can actually deform a little bit.
Oh, so they're not perfectly rigid. No, the pressure from the fluid actually causes them to deform slightly, which increases the contact area and makes the lubrication even better.
So our joints are changing shape to make things smoother. That's amazing.
It is, and this is super common in joints like the hip and knee, where the cartilage is designed to deform under load.
Incredible. Then there's microelasto-hydrodynamic lubrication.
Yeah.
This one seems to focus on those tiny asperities we talked about before.
You got it. Even with a good fluid film, those little peaks can still touch. But with microelastohydrodynamic lubrication, you get these micro deformations of the asperities themselves.
So they're like smoothing themselves out.
Exactly. It's like our bodies are constantly fine-tuning everything to reduce friction, even at a microscopic level.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
What are the other types of fluid film lubrication? Squeeze, film, boosted, and weeping.
Okay, so squeeze film lubrication, that happens when you apply a load to a joint, like when your heel hits the ground.
So like heel strike.
Yep.
The fluid gets squeezed out, but its viscosity creates resistance, providing a temporary layer of lubrication. Then you've got boosted lubrication. This was really interesting. It's specific to cartilage.
Oh, tell me more.
Think of it like a sponge. When cartilage gets compressed, it releases water and other lubricating molecules, creating a more concentrated lubricant right at the surface.
So it's like a built-in lubrication system.
Exactly. And weeping lubrication is similar, but it involves a slower release of those lubricating molecules.
Okay, so even the cartilage itself is helping to keep things moving smoothly. That's fascinating. Now, what about boundary lubrication? When does that kick in?
Boundary lubrication takes over when that fluid film breaks down and those surfaces are in direct contact.
So when things get a little too close for comfort.
Exactly. This usually happens at low speeds and high loads, like when you're just standing still for a long time.
Okay.
In boundary lubrication, special molecules in the synovial fluid, like lubricin, they actually attach themselves to the cartilage surfaces, creating a thin protective layer that helps to reduce friction and wear. So it's like a backup plan when the fluid film isn't enough.
Exactly. It's a really elegant system.
It sounds like our joints are constantly switching between these different lubrication modes depending on what we're doing. Is there a way to visualize how all this works?
There is. It's called the Strybeck curve. It's a graph that shows how lubrication changes with speed and load.
Okay, I like visuals.
At low speeds and high loads, you're in boundary lubrication territory with a higher coefficient of friction as the speed picks up and the load decreases. You transition into fluid film lubrication, which has a lower coefficient of friction.
So as you start moving, things get smoother.
Exactly. But then the curve shows that if you keep increasing the speed, friction starts to go up again. Why do you think that is?
Well, we talked about fluid drag earlier. Maybe that's coming back into play.
You got it. As the speed goes up, the fluid film gets thicker, and that thicker fluid starts to create resistance, increasing friction again.
So it's like that sweet spot again, not too slow, not too fast.
Exactly. Now, how do you think lubrication differs between natural joints and prosthetic joints?
That's a good question. I imagine there are some key differences.
You're right. In natural joints, elastohydrodynamic lubrication is the dominant mode, thanks to the amazing properties of cartilage and synovial fluid.
Okay.
But in prosthetic joints, things are more complicated. The artificial surfaces don't have the same give or lubrication properties as natural cartilage.
Right, so they might not be as slippery.
Exactly. And the fluid in the joint isn't exactly the same as natural synovial fluid either.
And it's like a different environment altogether.
It is. And that means lubrication can be less effective in those prosthetic joints, especially under high loads.
So boundary lubrication might be more common in those cases.
You got it. But there are also differences depending on the materials used, for example, metal on metal joints. Those actually exhibit some hydrodynamic lubrication during movement, depending on the speed.
Wow, so even the type of metal can affect lubrication.
It's all connected. This whole topic of lubrication really highlights how incredible our joints are, you know?
It really did.
And how much we still have to learn about replicating those mechanisms in artificial joints.
Absolutely. It's an area where there's still so much research being done. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about polyethylene, or PE. It's a really important material in a lot of orthopedic implants, but what exactly is it and how do we make it?
So polyethylene, or PE, it's a surprisingly simple molecule at its core, just a long chain of repeating ethylene units.
Okay, and how do we get from that simple molecule to something that can be used in an implant?
Well, we use a process called the Ziegler process. It transforms ethylene gas into a fine powder form.
Interesting. So it starts as a gas.
It does, and then that PE powder is used to create the actual implant components.
Got it. Now, the notes talk about four main methods for manufacturing: PE ram bar, extrusion, sheet compression, molding, hot isostatic pressing, and direct compression molding. Why are there so many different options?
Yeah.
And is there one that's considered the best?
You're right, there are quite a few, but among them, direct compression molding, or DCM, is often considered the gold standard.
Okay, what makes it so special?
DCM lets us directly compress that PE powder into the exact shape we need without having to do any extra machining on the bearing surface.
So it's like a one-and-done process?
Pretty much, and that means the final product has a smoother surface right out of the mold, which makes it less likely to develop cracks down the line. The other methods often require extra steps like machining or shaping after the initial molding, and that can create tiny imperfections that weaken the material.
So smoother is better when it comes to PE implants.
Mm-hmm.
What about sterilization? How do we make sure these implants are safe to use without messing up their properties?
Sterilization is crucial. There are three main ways to do it. Gamma irradiation. EO, gas, and gas plasma. Gamma irradiation is the most common, but it does have some potential downsides.
What are the downsides of using gamma irradiation?
Well, when PE is exposed to gamma radiation, it can cause something called chain scission. Basically, those long molecular chains can break apart.
Oh, so it's like damaging the material itself.
In a way, it creates these things called free radicals, which are highly reactive and can cause further changes in the material.
Free radicals.
Yeah, those free radicals can either recombine, cross-link, or undergo oxidation. Oxidation is the one we really want to avoid because it weakens the PE and makes it more prone to wear.
So how do we minimize that oxidation during gamma irradiation?
There are a few strategies. One is to do the irradiation in a vacuum, which reduces the amount of oxygen and therefore the chances of oxidation. Another approach is annealing, which involves heating the PE below its melting point to allow some of those free radicals to recombine.
So it's like calming them down?
Exactly. A more extreme method is remelting, which gets rid of almost all the free radicals, but it can also change the mechanical properties of the PE.
So it's a trade-off.
It is. And finally, some manufacturers add vitamin E to the PE, which acts as an antioxidant and helps to prevent that oxidation from happening in the first place.
It's like giving the PE a little extra protection.
Exactly. Now, the notes also talk about cross-linking, which seems to be a key process for making PE more wear-resistant. Can you explain what that is and how it works?
Sure. So cross-linking is basically a way to strengthen the PE by creating links between those long molecular chains. Think of it like adding extra supports to a bridge.
Okay, so you're reinforcing the structure.
Exactly, and it makes the material much more resistant to wear and tear.
So how do we actually cross-link PE?
We use high-dose gamma irradiation. The radiation causes those chains to break apart, and then some of those free radicals form bonds with neighboring chains, creating those cross-links. But remember, we still need to prevent oxidation. So those strategies we talked about earlier, vacuum processing, annealing, remelting, and adding vitamin E, they all apply here as well.
So it's like a multi-step process to make sure we get the best possible PE.
Precisely. Now, you might have heard about different generations of cross-linked PE or XLPE.
I have. What's the difference between them? So first generation XLPE usually involved just one cycle of annealing or remelting to reduce those free radicals and oxidation. But second generation XLPE takes it a step further. They either use vitamin E as an antioxidant or do multiple cycles of annealing and irradiation.
So they're basically fine-tuning the process to get even better results.
Exactly. And that leads to a more highly cross-linked and potentially more durable material.
Okay, and it's not just about the cross-linking itself, right? The packaging also plays a role in keeping that XLPE in tip-top shape.
Oh, absolutely. Proper packaging is key to minimize oxidation and preserve the properties of the XLPE.
So what kind of packaging are we talking about?
Usually it involves vacuum sealing the implants in special materials that don't let oxygen through. But even then, XLPE has a limited shelf life, so it's important to keep an eye on those expiration dates.
So we've got this super strong cross-linked PE, but it's still just a bunch of long chains, right? The notes mention two states of UHMWPE, crystalline and amorphous. What's the difference and how does cross-linking affect them?
You're right, the structure of PE is more complex than just a simple chain. Those chains can arrange themselves in a neat and orderly way, creating crystalline regions, or in a more random, jumbled way, creating amorphous regions.
So it's like the difference between a neatly organized stack of papers and a pile of loose sheets.
That's a great analogy. The crystalline regions give the PE its strength and rigidity, while the amorphous regions make it more flexible, and tough cross-linking happens mainly in those amorphous regions, making the material even stronger.
So it's like reinforcing the connections between those loose sheets of paper, making the whole thing more stable.
Exactly. Now, how do you think all of this translates to the real world? How does XLPE actually perform compared to regular PE?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, and the good news is that XLPE has been shown to dramatically reduce wear rates in total hip replacements.
That's great news. Less wear means longer-lasting implants, right?
Exactly. It leads to fewer wear particles, less inflammation, and ultimately implants that stay in place for longer.
That's a win-win. But there must be some downsides to using XLPE too, right?
You're right, there's always a trade-off. Cross-linking can change some of the mechanical properties of the PE.
In what way?
Well, it can decrease its tensile strength, which is how well it resists being pulled apart.
Okay.
It can also reduce fatigue strength, which is how well it handles repeated stress. And it can make it less fracture tough, meaning it's more likely to crack under pressure.
So it's more wear-resistant, but potentially more brittle.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to use XLPE strategically and consider all the factors involved when choosing an implant.
Makes sense. Now, the notes bring up an interesting point. Why not use XLPE in total knee replacements?
That's where things get a little controversial. While XLPE has been a game changer for hip replacements, there's some debate about its use in knee replacement.
What are the concerns about using it in the knee?
Well, first of all, the material properties change after cross-linking, as we talked about. XLPE can become more brittle and less resistant to fatigue, and that's a bigger concern in knee replacements because the forces and movements are different compared to hip replacements.
Can you explain that a bit more? How are the forces and movements different in the knee?
The hip joint is primarily a ball and socket joint with these smooth gliding motions. The wear in hip replacements is mainly due to microadhesion and abrasion,
Okay.
but the knee is more complicated. You've got rolling, sliding, and rotating motions happening all at once.
Right, it's a much more complex joint.
Exactly, and that puts different stresses on the implant.
Mhm.
The wear in knee replacements can involve fatigue failure with delamination and pitting.
So the worry is that XLPE, with its potentially reduced fatigue strength, might not hold up as well in the knee.
That's the concern, but the evidence is mixed. Some studies have shown higher rates of failure for XLPE in knee replacements, while others have shown no difference or even lower rates of failure. It's definitely an area where more research is needed.
So there's no clear-cut answer yet. What factors might increase the risk of XLPE failing in a knee replacement?
That's a great question. There are several things to consider. One is the thickness of the PE. Thin PE less than 8 millimeters is more susceptible to failure, especially with XLPE.
Okay.
Another factor is the design of those articular surfaces. Flat or non-conforming surfaces can lead to higher contact stresses, increasing the risk of wear and fatigue. And of course, surgical factors like the alignment and positioning of the components also play a role.
So it's a complex issue with a lot of variables to consider, but this is exactly the kind of nuanced discussion that's so valuable for residents preparing for those big exams. Being aware of these controversies and the different viewpoints is crucial. Now, before we wrap things up, just a reminder for everyone listening. We've been exploring the fascinating world of tribology today with the help of the Ortho Made Simple Notes, which you can find on mokyingren.sg. They've been an incredible resource for us. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're in the home stretch now of our tribology journey, and I gotta say, I'm really starting to grasp just how much those little details, those tiny things, can really impact the lifespan of an orthopedic implant.
It is pretty amazing, isn't it? All those interactions between the surfaces, the materials, the fluids, they all play such a crucial role in how our joints work, whether we're talking about natural joints or the ones we create.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap things up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, corrosion. We see it every day, rust on our cars, things like that. But how does corrosion actually affect those orthopedic implants, the ones that are supposed to be made of biocompatible materials?
That's a great question. Corrosion is a big deal in orthopedics because it can weaken implants, release metal ions into the body, and ultimately lead to implant failure. And it's not just about rust forming. There are actually different types of corrosion that can occur, each with its own, quirks and consequences.
The notes mention generalized versus localized corrosion? What's the difference?
So generalized corrosion is kind of what it sounds like. It's more widespread and uniform. It happens over a larger area of the metal.
Okay, so more like a general wearing down.
Exactly. Localized corrosion, on the other hand, is more focused and can be a lot more dangerous because we often don't catch it until it's too late.
Oh, so it's like a stealthy attacker.
Exactly. And then there are specific types of localized corrosion like galvanic pitting, crevice, fretting, and stress corrosion.
Okay, so those are the different ways it can manifest. Can you give us a quick rundown of each one?
Of course. So galvanic corrosion happens when you have two different types of metal touching each other in the presence of an electrolyte, like body fluid.
Right, our bodies are basically big bags of electrolytes.
Exactly. One metal becomes what we call the anode, and it corrodes while the other metal becomes the cathode. And it's protected. Think of it like a battery. The anode is the negative terminal, and that's the one that gets eaten away.
So using different metals in an implant could actually trigger corrosion inside the body.
That's the risk, and that's why choosing the right materials is absolutely critical when designing implants.
Makes sense. Now, what about pitting corrosion?
Pitting corrosion is sneaky. It starts with these tiny little pits or holes forming on the surface of the metal, usually where that protective layer has been damaged.
Yeah.
Those pits then become hotspots for more corrosion, and they can grow pretty quickly, weakening the implant from the inside out.
Oh, wow. So it's like a hidden enemy slowly destroying the implant.
Pretty much. And then you've got crevice corrosion, which is similar to pitting, but it happens specifically in those tight spaces where fluid can get trapped, like a gap between a screw and the implant or even between two implant components.
So those tiny gaps can be real trouble spots.
They can, in those tight spaces, the fluid can become stagnant, creating a perfect environment for corrosion to take hold.
Makes sense. Now, what about fretting corrosion? That one sounds especially worrisome.
Fretting corrosion is a nasty combination of wear and crevice corrosion. It happens when two surfaces are touching but also moving slightly against each other, like tiny vibrations or micromotions.
Okay, so they're not supposed to be moving, but they are.
Exactly. And that movement disrupts that protective oxide layer, exposing the metal underneath to corrosion. And to make matters worse, the wear process creates debris, which can actually accelerate the corrosion even further.
Oh, wow. So it's a double whammy of damage.
You got it. And finally, there's stress corrosion.
What's that one all about?
Stress corrosion is another type of accelerated corrosion. It happens when a metal is under stress and exposed to a corrosive environment. At the same time, it's like adding fuel to the fire.
So the stress makes the metal more vulnerable.
Exactly. The stress concentrates at weak points in the metal, making those areas more likely to corrode. And once a crack starts to form, it can spread really quickly, potentially leading to a catastrophic failure.
That's scary stuff. It's amazing how many different ways corrosion can happen and how they can all work together to break down an implant.
It really is a multifaceted challenge, and that's why understanding these mechanisms is so crucial in orthopedics. We need to be really smart about choosing the right materials, designing implants carefully, and using the best surgical techniques to minimize those risks and make sure those implants last as long as possible.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about friction wear, lubrication, and corrosion in orthopedics. I feel like I've learned a ton, and I bet our listeners have too.
I hope so. And remember, this was just a glimpse into the world of tribology. There's always more to learn, more research to be done, and new discoveries waiting just around the corner.
That's what keeps things interesting to all our listeners out there prepping for those tough postgraduate exams. We've been using the Ortho Made Simple notes from mokyingren.sg as our guide today. They're a fantastic resource. Definitely check them out. But don't stop there. Keep learning. Keep asking questions. And most importantly, take this knowledge and apply it to your clinical practice. Until next time, keep diving deep.